This article is about the death penalty decision-making, fundamentalist belief, and the evaluation of aggravating and mitigating circumstances. The purpose of this study was to assess the extent to which religious fundamentalism was related to endorsement and weighing of aggravators and mitigators, and the subsequent death penalty decisions while controlling for relevant religious and demographic characteristics. There were two studies. In the first study, the participants filled out religious and demographic measures in an online survey. And in study two, the participants acted like they were mock jurors and they read a case brief. It was about 1,900 words. The case brief had the attorney arguments and had the aggravators and the mitigators in the case brief, and they recommended the sentence after. Study one, they found that fundamentalists negatively predicted mitigator endorsement, and the same with intrinsic religiosity negatively predicted aggravator endorsement. So they were on the other end of the scale. Orthodoxy predicted aggravator endorsement. That results study one, fundamentalists were related to death penalty, and it was also related to a less likely of using a life sentence. And the reason why that was because fundamentalists negatively related weighing mitigators over aggravators. So they chose aggravators every time over mitigators. There's been prior research, and this study did that prior research, and this article also discussed the legal implications of the study. We know that the law is basically rooted in all the way back from the very beginning of our country. We have taken laws and ideas of religion and made laws out of them, or prohibited certain types of behavior based on usually Christian beliefs. So how does religion influence juries? Basically, how a person sees right and wrong or good and bad are rooted in a religion, and whoever chooses a certain religion also chooses that moral reasoning that the religion stands on. So when religious decisions, they're always consulting that foundation where beliefs are rooted in. The death penalty trials are different than regular trials because the jurors have to be decided. The trials are also two-part trials. They're bifurcated, meaning there's one part of the trial that is hearing evidence, and the second part of the trial, which is on a different date, hands down the sentences. The jurors are supposed to weigh the aggravators and the mitigators in the case fundamentalists, fundamentalism negatively affects those mitigators. So some of the things that really affect religious beliefs are what type of religion and the characteristics of that religion, what type of affiliations, beliefs, and orientations they have inside that religion. And they all make a difference in how a capital juror makes a decision. Religious fundamentalism has a very high support for the death penalty, and devotionalism, evangelism, religious salience, and forgiveness all have a reduced support for the death penalty, which is basically they're Christian attitudes, but on the other end of the spectrum. So whatever a person believes in basically is the foundation for how they behave and what they think, how other they think other people should behave. So in your identity, your religion kind of relies on what you believe, and it's shaped, your whole identity is shaped by those beliefs. So if you're leaning on certain religious beliefs, then it's going to shape your behavior. Your social identity also, people who are religious tend to identify more with certain aspects of society, and they are, you're unable to really detach and be a different person in the world, I guess you can say. So they're usually going to behave in a way that is consistent with whatever religion they're practicing. Death penalty trials are important because they really point out how people think morally and religiously, and it really highlights the different ways that evidence and other information is processed through the different lenses of religiosity and the moral reasoning that lays within religion. So a religious fundamentalist, they believe in a single divine God, biblical truth, sinful human nature, and free will. There's not going to be a deviation from this. It's pretty cut and dry. Prosecuting attorneys can really focus on these beliefs when they're seeking the death penalty, because they know that fundamentalists are going to choose the more punitive verdict, and they are not, their thinking is framed in how they're going to accept certain evidence and information, and that's going to usually lead to the same decision. They want religious fundamentalists seek consistency in their beliefs. So murder is equals the death penalty every time, and they're going to see evidence that supports the death penalty they're going to overseeing evidence that does not support the death penalty. So they're not going to put very much weight on the circumstances. Some of the identities that are kind of embedded are the eye for an eye doctrine, meaning if murder deserves death, and so on and so forth. Eye for an eye. Devotion to religious beliefs and practices, belief in the general Christian tenets, inner sacredness. That's really important too. The intrinsic religiosity, they are more, they're on the other end of the spectrum, have a less increased endorsement of mitigators. And devotionalism, it goes both ways depending on where that person kind of falls on the scale. And orthodoxy, more punitive sentences and higher endorsement of aggravators and lower endorsement of mitigators. All right, so study one, the religious beliefs and how they evaluate those in general. They're not case specific. Study two was case specific and how they weigh those aggravators and mitigators. In study one, there's two hypotheses. First, religious fundamentalism will be positively related to aggravator endorsement. And study two, hypothesis two, religious fundamentalism will be negatively related to mitigator endorsement. This participants were students who identified themselves as being religious, and they were from a Western university. They completed an online survey which measured their religious characteristics. They gave them an endorsement for their aggravator and mitigator circumstances, their demographic information, and they completed the survey on their own time. The questions depended on 12 aggravators and 10 mitigators. There was a 5-point scale: strongly agree, strongly disagree. Age was a continuous variable. Race and political orientation were measured categorically, but they were put into a dummy. They were masked, so that didn't make a difference. The gender was male or female. Some of the models that were assessed were, like I said, the political affiliation and the race was masked. So the results were hypothesis one was not supported. They were related to less mitigator endorsement and unrelated to aggravator endorsement, which is kind of goes against what we were talking about in the beginning. Fundamentalism might be related to punitiveness, and they believe that punishment equal to a moral violation. So depending on the crime, they're more likely to render the death penalty than non-fundamentalists, and the orthodoxy death sentencing are lean more toward death sentences because of the aggravators. Intrinsically religious are more likely to choose life sentence. Being older was related to higher aggravator endorsement, and being Republican was related to lower mitigator endorsement. So basically, if you're an old Republican, you're likely to choose the death penalty. Study 2 had 6 hypotheses. And they kind of go along lines as study number 1. The subjects that were in the study were Amazon MTurk workers, and I really don't have any idea what those people do, but they were paid for their participation, they were death qualified, and they were religious. The study took 30 minutes, so not terribly too long. It was not monitored, and they were required to complete 500 human intelligent tasks. And this ensured a high quality data equal to or better than the use of attention checks. Participants were almost 50% female and almost 82% white. So the majority of the people were white. This was the breakdown of the religious beliefs. 41% are Protestant and Christian, and 5% are others. So there's a pretty big gap. The political affiliations were pretty equal. There were more liberals than there were conservatives, but there's only a 10% difference in the two. And that kind of makes up for moderate. So the moderates kind of fall in between those two. Pretty even. They answered randomly assigned questions. They read the trial description, the judge's instructions, the closing arguments, and then they identified and weighed aggravating and mitigators. They chose the sentence and then filled out their religious measures. So the results were that religious fundamentalism were significantly related to weighing mitigators over aggravators. Religious fundamentalism evidence was significant in the interaction of evidence. Negatively related to weighing mitigators over aggravators, but only in high mitigator conditions. So if there was a lot of mitigators. Hypothesis 3 was supported. Hypothesis 4 was supported. Hypothesis 5 was supported. And basically, hypothesis 6 was not supported. And basically what this means is that there was a confirmation of bias of the religious
Hey, we just need to give the keys back to for Carter. All right. Thank you much.
Oh, sorry about that. Somebody rang my doorbell. All right, I'm not doing this again because I've already, tried this 6 times already. So we're just going to go back to this study to the discussion. So basically, it was based on the condition of logical. That means there was no room for the for fundamentalists to make any different decisions. So they were more eye for an eye. Their decisions were tied to their moral and religious identities. And if a person is found guilty of murder, then they're going to receive the death penalty, basically. So what are the implications for prosecuting attorneys, the defense attorneys, the trial? These all affects all of these people because they are going to they're not going to weigh the aggravating and the mitigating circumstances equally. Some parts of the United States have more fundamentalists than not, and most religious fundamentalists are more likely to be death qualified. So, depending on where the trial is taking place, we know South Central and the South Atlantic regions have more fundamentalists, and we're going to see a higher rate of death penalty in those areas. In 1976, the Supreme Court said that we could execute so long as the aggravating evidence was able to narrow the class of murders subject to capital punishment, meaning that they had to weigh aggravating and mitigating circumstances equally. But this study does show that religious fundamentalists are not putting this equal amount of weight on these circumstances and are coming to death penalty decisions at a different rate than than in different parts of the country. So the recommendation is for judges and attorneys to consider the religious beliefs when they predict how jurors might evaluate interpreted evidence presented in the sentencing phase of a death penalty trial. Criminals do not die by the hands of the law. They die by the hands of other men. This is a very good quote, I thought. Depending on what the law is, kind of depends on whether or not people are going to receive the death penalty or not. So that's something to really think about in the future of death penalty. All right.